whenever you do this to the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you've done it to me. And so what we're doing is we're telling stories about doing good for others, that are people that are made in the image of God. And those stories, I think, are lighting up our world. So I don't ever back down from the fact that we tell stories around this place, because I think we want to give God glory for it, and we want to inspire people to do good, because this world's got enough darkness in it. Yeah. We need light.
Welcome to the Pure Heart Church podcast. I'm not Zach Good. He's out sick, so I'm filling in for him. My name is Jill Blackman. We're so excited for this podcast that we have for you, so let's jump right in.
So we are here with Pastor Dan, and Pastor Dan, we're tackling a topic that I don't know that we've actually addressed in this sort of way in any of our services or content or anything like that before, and it's talking about BIWIs.
BIWIs. What's a BIWI?
A BIWI, because it's worth it.
There you
but
go.
We forget that most people aren't familiar with that term BIWI, which started way back in, 2016 or 17?
Long time ago.
When we're having this generosity initiative, like, hey, we need to build some buildings, and we want our church family to lean in and pray and ask God what are they called to do and give. And our Mark Slaybaugh, who was our consultant at the time, helping us figure out how to navigate this. That guy is so smart.
He is. Yeah, I was like, Mark, just help me. Give me some tools to use. And he's like, no, the tools are in you. I'm going to bring them out. And I'm like, no, give me some tools. Show me what I need to do. But he did a great job of just asking questions and getting us to tell our own story. And through that, telling our own story, we were able to make a massive, massive difference in our next generation. Our brand new children's facility, the youth center that was completely remodeled, that's now reaching hundreds of students every single week.
Our studio.
Yeah, studio.
Yeah.
Just,
Crossroads.
He taught us how to tell stories.
Yeah. And I think it seems so simple in a way. It's like, well, sure, why isn't your church telling your story about the things you're doing? But I think and I'd love to hear your kind of idea, but I think there's a couple reasons that I kind of felt like I stumbled across. One is that it can feel a little bit braggadocious.
Yeah.
It's like I don't want these people to just think like, hey, look at all the things we're doing. We're special. We're amazing. It's like, but that's not the why. And I think that sometimes we forget that people don't know all the stories.
It's true. Yeah. I first of all, I would just say Jesus was a master storyteller. Mm-hmm. He took the heart of the law. He took the heart of God's boundaries for his people, and he put them to stories to help people understand. Like, instead of like, don't worry or don't fear, he started telling, consider the sparrow.
Yeah.
Look at the grass of the field. Look at the lilies in the field. He just told stories. The guy shouts out, says, tell my brother to share the inheritance with me. And Jesus goes, a story for you. There was a rich man. And he just goes through this, and he told stories to get to the heart of the matter, because we remember stories. And stories also turn on the light bulb in our brain, the aha moment of like, oh, that's how that applies to my life. Stories help us to apply truth in context of everyday living. And so it's interesting you bring up this idea about, it sounds braggadocious when we tell our stories and, we're feeding 3,500 people a month and all these different things. Yeah. I was teaching at Grand Canyon University 2 weeks ago on a Monday. We were doing the chapel in the arena. A little intimidating, by the way, to be over all these students, thousands of students and faculty. And but they gave me a passage. It's the first time in a long time I've gone somewhere and they gave me a passage to teach out of. Usually I can bring my own message and something in my heart. So they were they were working through the Sermon on the Mount. So I got the section in Matthew chapter 6 talking about, the whole idea of when you give to the poor, when you give to the needy, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Because if you do, then you'll already have received your reward here on earth. And so I was working through that. And I told a story about a friend of mine who donated $1 million to a ministry.
That's a chunk of change.
But his whole thing was, and he knew that I would know about it because I was overseeing one of the ministries, that ministry. And so he's like, hey, I'm going to give this. I don't want anybody other than Jesus and yourself to know that this is going on, and I said, let me pray about it. Okay. So, but I was in a room with him one time, and there was all these people sitting in this room, and we were talking about this $1 million gift. Yeah. He was in the room with us, and he was beaming. I mean, absolutely beaming. Yeah. And I said to him afterwards, I said, what were you feeling? What were you thinking? And I remember him saying to me, he's like, I had not felt that kind of joy Thank you for not letting anybody know it was me because I felt God's pleasure.
Sure.
Just between God and I and doing that.
Yeah.
So as I'm teaching on that and making sure that you're not bragging in social media and, hey, look what I'm doing today and look what I'm giving, I'm helping these people today. But I had to harmonize that with, in the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus also says, you're the salt of the earth, you're the light of the world.
Yeah.
Do your good deeds in front of men that in such a way that your light will shine so that they will praise your Father in heaven.
That's powerful.
And so in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, well, how do I harmonize this?
Yeah.
Jesus in one moment says, when you give to the poor, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing.
Sure.
But then there's this other moment when he says, do good deeds in such a way that it'll shine before men so that they'll praise God for it. It all comes down to motive. It's always about motive. It's always about heart, Matt. And it's like, are we telling the story to brag on us or to brag on God?
Sure.
That's why I challenged you guys a while back. Remember, I said, I want to make sure every time we talk about one of the stories of generosity or stuff that we're doing, we always say we are praising God for the ability to do this. Yeah. Because we couldn't have been good. We couldn't have done good things. We wouldn't have the resources to do this if God didn't do that. So the motive is God going to get the glory or am I going to get the glory? Yeah. Who gets the credit is the very first question you have to ask. And then I think the second thing is there's a big difference between look at me and follow me.
Yes, I agree with that.
So I believe, Paul said, follow me as I follow Christ. I believe that there's certain things that, and I was telling the Grand Canyon students the other day, I said, so that's what my friend did. And I said, and you need to know in your life when there's moments, I need to know in my life when there's moments when God says, hey, this act of generosity, this good deed, I don't want anybody to know about it but me.
Sure.
Also, they used to blow trumpets in ancient times outside the temple and everybody would gather around and then the rich person would be giving stuff to the poor. It actually took away the dignity of the poor as well. It exploited the poor for their own gain. So there were reasons why Jesus was saying this. But I do believe a part of it is because God wants us sometimes just to give in a way that goes, hey, only I'm going to know about this. And can you handle that? Or do you really need the credit for this? You need a plaque on the wall somewhere. You need a name on this or something. But I was telling the students about adopting our girls. And, with Olivia and Ava adopting them, and our passion is to see every child in the state of Arizona who doesn't have a forever family be adopted into a forever family. And so we tell our story all the time. I talk about Nicole's sacrifice all the time. Not say, look at me.
Sure.
For two reasons. Number one is to say, look at what God has done. Those girls are miracles. They're alive because of the grace of God in their life. Fentanyl and heroin and alcohol should have killed them in the womb.
Yeah.
But they are alive today by the grace of God. So we praise him for that. But secondly, it's follow me. I've had people come up to me and tell me, hey, I never considered foster care or adoption until I heard your story.
That's cool.
Never thought about that.
Sure.
And so we've had several families that are now adopting or fostering, stepping into this arena and loving these kids that need forever homes. Yeah. And that's so our goal for stories is to give God credit and to inspire people to do good.
Yeah.
That's why we tell stories.
Sure.
That's the motive of it. If it was, hey, look at Pure Heart, look how wonderful we are, then God's going to test that. God knows the heart. We can try to fake it, but we try to make sure that's our heart all the time.
And I think there's also, you brought up a great point about the exploiting. I think a lot of times stories can exploit vulnerable people.
Absolutely.
And that's one thing I know that us as a team try to really think through of like, how can we, these kids in an underprivileged school or people in a resource center or people coming through addiction or recovery, I think sometimes the people are so disparaged maybe in the story. It's like, no, these are people, we're all lost without God, right? We're in this journey together. And here's how we're, as people who are struggling in the journey, here's how God's allowed us to lift up and encourage people, go arm to arm with them in the midst of their struggles.
You have to be able to also smell the humility in the story.
Yeah.
If you can't smell humility in it, then the story is really about that person. Yeah. A person that is so blessed and so honored that God would use them, that's going to come out in that story. I know we have a story coming up to end this series, Money Talks. And, when I look at Michael and Rebecca Bills, these are two very humble people. They're not telling their story because they want to be noticed or recognized. As a matter of fact, it's hard for them to get behind a camera and record that story. They don't want to do it,
It's a struggle.
But they are so humbled by what God has done in their life. Michael coming out of his addiction, coming out, his past of being in prison. And their whole story is a miracle.
Yeah.
But you can smell the humility in their story. You can smell how humbled they are. You just feel it, that they're so humble that God would use them. And those are the kind of stories we love to tell because it's not about, hey, look at me. It's about, hey, look what God's done in me And then would you follow my example? And I hope this inspires you to do good as well.
Yeah. Those are actually the people I love to, or I would even say most of the time I would be the ones that put behind a camera, tell their story, because they're not here to tell it because they want to lift themselves up. They are sometimes hesitant, or they just go, man, we want to shine more light on this area, on this topic. And that's one of the things I love about us telling stories too, is suddenly people go, wait a minute, Pure Heart does that with this thing over here, the resource center, where it allows people to go, oh, that's an area I have a value for. I have a care for, something God's put deep in my heart. I had no idea my church was involved with that. Maybe I can go volunteer. Maybe I can go help. And I've seen several times where those people end up being the ones that end up leading that ministry. Some of the strongest leaders, as they go, well, I heard that you guys were doing this. God put that passion in my heart. I knew I had to get involved.
I love that. And I think it too is does the story honor God? Mm-hmm. You think about the woman who came and poured out the alabaster jar on Jesus' head. Yeah. This perfume, and the disciples were indignant about it. Like, all this money could have been given to the poor. Mm-hmm. And what did Jesus say about her? He said, no, don't stop her. She's done something beautiful for me. Her story will be told wherever this gospel is preached.
Yeah.
Like, he's like, this story of generosity, this story of extravagance towards me, towards God himself in the flesh, will be told over and over and over and over and over again. So I think sometimes that people that get a little bit sideways about the stories that we tell, mm-hmm. or why you telling that story, I think sometimes, oh man, this is a tough way to say this. I'm gonna be careful how I say this, but sometimes I just feel like they're just convicted.
I think you're right.
They're just convicted.
Yeah.
And honestly, they are instead of going, wow, what good do I need to do with my life? How should I be inspired by this? Instead, they throw up they project, they throw up a smoke screen, and it's like, oh, they're just not being humble. They're just all about themselves. Yeah. I think most of the time, and sometimes you have to listen to that, because you got to be careful how we're telling. You have to be careful how we're telling our stories about what God's done, and are we making it more about us than we should? Because we got to look at that. Got to examine our hearts as a church too. But I think sometimes, so often, it's just people that are just like, they're just defensive because they don't want to own it, they don't want to be challenged by it, and they don't want to go out and do that same good.
Yeah, and I think the other ones that don't fall into that camp are probably ones who have seen it done wrong.
Oh yeah,
they've
seen churches abuse it, or they feel like they're just going to be manipulated to get their money.
Yeah, and so churches do that. They're sensitive to it, and they go, "Man, I've seen this before." I know that during COVID, we really tried to lean in. We'd been telling stories, since that time when Mark Slabaugh, challenges. That was 2017 or someone around there, 2016. Yeah, and we started telling stories, and that's a little bit of trying to find what matches with what we're doing, and does this fit? Is this is this honoring? Is this good storytelling? There's a lot of logistics that go into those different things, but we started really leaning in during COVID and telling stories. And that was the thing that we got to then bring a ton of exposure to Bob and the Go team of just like Pastor Bob, like look at what we're doing. We're giving away hundreds of thousands of pounds of food. We're helping nurses, doctors. And again, it wasn't to shine the light on ourselves and say, look at what we're doing. It's like, look, we see the need. We want to be Christ to these people. And during that time, we were praying for other churches every single week. I don't know if we had started it then or started it before, not long before then, but we were praying for other churches and then celebrating what they were doing in those different areas. Right. In the midst of COVID, in the midst of this, people are scared. We tend to think about the politics of it now, but in the moment, people were scared. They were afraid, or losing jobs, or laid off work. Store shelves have no food. Am I going to get sick? My kids. Family members died. There was so much fear and anxiety. Churches closed. Physically, what does this all look like? And we're going to tell these stories. And over and over, I found all these amazing churches around us that we were able to pray for and tell their story of what they were doing, how they were leaning in, being the hands and feet of Christ. And then there was one of them that was a pretty big church that I looked on their Facebook page, I looked on their social media, I looked on their website, and then I actually called the front office because I saw a lot of things they were doing. They were doing a lot of Bible studies, a lot of Zoom calls and stuff, but I didn't see anything that was community-based of trying to reach out in this moment. And they kind of said, well, we're doing this thing. And I was just heartbroken because I felt like this is the moment for us as the church
to shine.
This is the moment to be like, guys, this is hard. This is scary for some people to be coming and serving in the midst of something they're even fearful, but they know they have to do it because they know God's called it to. And I was heartbroken for that church because I'm like, this is a story they're missing out on, to be able to tell people. During that time, I had an interesting that happened this last weekend. There's a gentleman serving, and I started up a conversation with him, and it's always a weird thing, but he goes, "Oh, I know who you are." And I go, okay. And he said, actually, you're the reason we're attending Pure Heart now. I said, "Oh, why is that?" He said, we started attending right around when COVID, in the midst of COVID. And he goes, we were having some challenges at the church we were at, just some church hurt and some different directions the church was going we just didn't feel comfortable with. And we were trying to figure out, where's God calling us to at a church? And we literally Googled. And he goes, you guys popped up. And he goes, your story about the shoes is why we started coming.
Yeah,
and
I remember that.
I was kind of confused because I go, story about the shoes. And he goes, well, how you gave your shoes. And we were in the midst, reminded me, we were in the midst of a shoe drive. And I had a pair of white leather shoes that I wore on like special occasions, Easter, Christmas and stuff. And they had kind of started to get worn out and kind of a little bit beat up. And I had just bought an expensive pair of new white leather shoes. And then we did that shoe drive. And God just told me, you're supposed to give those shoes. And I totally honestly, my first impulse was, I don't want to.
I got another pair.
Yeah. Or I could go buy some other shoes or something. Yeah. And it was just at that moment, God said to me, he's like, no. This is something you value. Why would you give something of less value to people that deserves something of value? Yeah. If you believe you deserve something of value, why do you believe they don't? And man, it just wrecked my heart. And so I shared that story online, just challenging people to also lean in. Just how's God calling you to give above and beyond? And that's what we've been doing also in this last generosity series is what's God calling you to do? How are you being called to make an eternal impact? That was some stupid shoes at the end of the day,
But look how that story
impacted
how
someone.
Those shoes, that gift, that generosity impacted somebody's life.
And that person now serving in a position of some leadership in our church as a volunteer.
That's awesome, Matt. That's
and I
awesome.
just go, God, man, thank you for letting me be convicted at a moment to share my story.
I think too, there's so many, this world is full of fear and anger.
Yeah.
There's so much fear and anger. That's what motivates almost all cable news shows. There's just so much, there's so many bad stories out there. And I think the church should be telling good stories, telling stories of hope and love and light and stories of generosity. We need to be telling these stories. And as long as God's getting the glory for it, we're recognizing we couldn't do it without him. And as long as our motive is, hey, follow us as we follow Jesus and not look at me and follow me, or look at me, I think that our hearts will be in the right place. We keep our motives right. But this world needs better stories. Yeah. And the church should tell the best stories because we have the good news. We have the hope, man. We have joy.
I love it.
And so I love that we're making a difference. I think we have that question we ask all the time. If we were gone tomorrow, would the community around us, not just our community here at Pure Heart, would the community around us miss us? And I think churches are missing it. We're missing it as the church in the city of in the city of Phoenix. We're missing it if we don't realize that being in God's word is of utmost importance. Yep. Studying the word, worship, corporate time, community, being in small groups together, learning and studying the Bible together, praying together. All that is so important. But God called us to do good. Jesus said, in the end, the story in Matthew's gospel, he says, in the end, when it's all said and done, the king will say, hey, I was thirsty and you gave me nothing to drink. I was hungry. You gave me nothing to eat. I was in prison. You didn't visit me. And in prison in those days, the whole idea of being in prison is that the government didn't pay for you to have food in prison. If you didn't have friends visit you to bring you food, you died in prison. That's just the way it was. So that's why Paul was so grateful for people visiting him while he was in prison, because they brought him food and supplies, because Rome wasn't going to give that to him. Yeah. And so he said that, whenever you do this to the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you've done it to me. And so what we're doing is we're telling stories about doing good for others, people that are made in the image of God. And those stories, I think, are lighting up our world. So I don't ever back down from the fact we tell stories around this place, because I think we want to give God glory for it. And we want to inspire people to do good, because this world's got enough darkness in it. Yeah. We need light.
Got to do it because it's worth it.
It's because it's worth it.
BIWI, because it's worth it.
BIWI. Good hanging out with you, Matt.
So good.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the podcast today. We had an awesome episode. If you liked this, share it with your friends, like it, do whatever you got to do to stay up to date. We have a ton of great podcasts lined up. We'll see you next Tuesday.